Welcome back to the third and final part of Chapter 2. In our previous journey, we walked through the minds of Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman. Three voices who reshaped the American spirit with thought, rebellion, and poetic breadth. Now, we turn the page to another chorus of voices, those who warmed American hearts and lecterns alike. In this session, we will explore the Fireside Poets and Brahmin Poets, delve into the meditative depth of William Cullen Bryant, trace the lyrical grace of Longfellow, and witness the interior revolution of Emily Dickinson. We'll also step into the literary worlds of Louisa May, Alcott, and Mark Twain. Two storytellers who captured the domestic pulse and satirical edges of 19th century America. This is the final stretch of our chapter, and it brings with it not just knowledge, but reflection. At the end of this session, I will share previous year questions to help you test your understanding, along with a last-minute revision summary to guide your memory. So, take a deep breath. Let's begin with the warm and moral verses of the Fireside Poets. In the gentle glow of 19th century hearts, poetry was not a solitary whisper, but a shared breath. Read aloud beside crackling fires, memorized by school children, passed from lips to memory like a sacred lullaby. These were the works of the Fireside Poets. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, John Greenleaf Whittier, William Cullen Bryant, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., and James Russell Lowell. Their verses spoke of home, of history, of virtue, wrapping moral lessons in metered rhyme and traditional forms. They were the poets of the people, beloved by families gathered in parlors where poetry became ritual. But among them, another name echoed in quieter, more rarefied chambers, the Brahmin Poets. This term, not born of religion but of social standing, referred to the same voices, yet from a different lens. Longfellow, Holmes, Lowell, and others like George Ticknor were not just poets, they were Harvard men, custodians of European literary inheritance, and editors of taste within Boston's refined circles. They lived at the intersection of scholarship and sentiment, shaping not only what poetry said, but who was allowed to say it. Where Fireside speaks to reach and warmth, Brahmin whispers of influence and class. One enchanted the common air, the other dictated the canon. And though these dual legacies once held American verse in their steady hands, they would in time be gently unseated by the wild and daring tongues of Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. Voices less polished, perhaps, but infinitely more free. Imagine being 17 and penning a poem so vast in spirit, so eternal in thought, that it echoes across centuries. That was William Cullen Bryant, born in 1794 and remembered as one of the earliest voices to give American poetry a contemplative soul. His poem, Thanatopsis, meaning a view of death, is not a lament but a meditation, a whisper from the earth itself. In this poem, nature does not shout, it speaks in a still voice, reminding us that in death all return to the same soil, kings and peasants, children and sages. The ground beneath our feet, Bryant tells us, is not merely dirt, but a shared resting place, where bones mingle and time forgets hierarchy. Death, then, is not the end, but a homecoming. And as he writes, we should meet it not with terror, but with peace, sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust, like one who lies down for gentle dreams. Bryant was more than a poet. As editor of the New York Evening Post, he shaped thought, shaped taste, and shaped the American imagination. But it is Thanatopsis, written in the tender years of youth, that remains his most enduring gift. A fusion of romantic longing, spiritual calm, and nature's timeless embrace. In the soft, flickering glow of 19th century hearts, one name echoed in verse and comfort, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Born in 1807 and passing in 1882, Longfellow was more than a poet, he was a household presence. His poems were read by lamplight, memorized by school children, and spoken aloud as moral music for the American soul. Educated at Bowdoin, steeped in European languages, and later a professor at Harvard, Longfellow was a bridge between old world elegance and new world spirit. His voice was gentle yet far-reaching. Early fame found him through Voices of the Night in 1839, where a psalm of life called readers to act, to live with purpose, not passivity. But it was in the Song of Hiawatha, published in 1855, that Longfellow tried something bold, a mythic epic rooted in Native American lore. With trochaic rhythm echoing ancient chants, he conjured forests, rivers, and the quiet wisdom of tribal life. Though shaped through a romantic Euro-American lens, the poem marked a turning point. America was no longer just borrowing stories, it was beginning to tell its own. Longfellow mourned deeply too. After the tragic death of his second wife in 1861, he turned inward, translating Dante's Divine Comedy and composing sonnets that shimmered with sorrow and grace. In works like Evangeline, Paul Revere's Ride, and The Courtship of Miles Standish, Longfellow gave us heroes, heartbreak, and hope. He wrote not for critics, but for the heart. And it is there, still, that his words quietly remain. In the quiet town of Amherst, Massachusetts, behind a white window pane and a life mostly unseen, a revolution was blooming in silence. Emily Dickinson, born in 1830 and departing in 1886, chose not the pulpit or the press, but the inward gaze. And from that stillness, she changed American poetry forever. She published only a handful of poems in her lifetime, 10 out of nearly 1800. Yet each one was a meteor of insight, compressed into brief lines, irregular dashes, and rhymes that leaned just slightly sideways. Critics call it slant rhyme, but to the ear it is something softer, stranger, more human. While Emerson and Whitman looked outward to nature, to democracy, to the cosmic self, Dickinson turned inward. She stitched poems like lace, drawing from hymn meters and ballad rhythms, then breaking them with sudden pauses and enjambments. Her language was not loud, but it echoed, as if the soul had found a whisper precise enough to wound. Death, immortality, time, the soul, these were her themes. But she held them up not like monuments, but like riddles. Because I could not stop for death, she wrote, he kindly stopped for me. The tone is gentle, yet terrifying, playful, yet profound. Inspired by Isaac Watts, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and yes, even Emerson, she nonetheless carved a space of her own. A paradox of isolation and universality. A voice that speaks most clearly when barely above a breath. Only in the 20th century did the world truly begin to listen and realize that Dickinson's interior revolution was not a footnote, but a turning point. In just 12 lines, Emily Dickinson delivers a truth that echoes far beyond the battlefield. Written in 1859 and published after her death in 1890, Success is counted sweetest. Begins not with triumph, but with absence, with yearning. Success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed to comprehend a nectar requires sorest need. Here, nectar is not just a metaphor. It is longing crystallized, a sweetness only the starving soul can truly taste. Dickinson reminds us, gently but unflinchingly, that the heart most attuned to victory is often the one that never wins. And then the final image arrives, not as celebration, but as irony. Not one of all the purple host who took the flag today can tell the definition so clear of victory. The soldiers draped in glory, the so-called victors, cannot define what they have gained. But the fallen, lying breathless, just beyond reach, understand it all too well. In defeat, there is clarity. In longing, there is revelation. This is Dickinson's gift, to show us the edge of things, not with grandeur, but with precision, not in noise, but in nuance. Her paradoxes do not confuse. They reveal. And in this quiet poem, she reminds us that the truest taste of success may belong to those who never hold it. because she could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for her. So begins one of Emily Dickinson's most haunting and graceful poems, first published in 1890 after her passing. Death is not a terror here. He is not a thief in the night. He arrives like a polite suitor, calm, composed, and strangely kind. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. And so they ride together, past the school where children play, a symbol of beginnings, past the fields of grain, past life in its fullness, past the setting sun, light waning, time slipping quietly away. Each scene is not just a moment, it's a metaphor, unfolding like seasons, and through it all there is no fear, only stillness, only a sense of passage. Then the final lines arrive like the hush before twilight. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Time bends. Death is not an end, but a direction, an onward movement. The speaker, long gone from life, still remembers the moment with clarity. Because in Dickinson's vision, the soul never stops moving. This is her genius. She turns the unknowable into a slow carriage ride, a quiet journey, a poem that does not weep but listens, watches, waits, and takes us gently to the edge of eternity. I heard a fly buzz when I died, and with that line, Emily Dickinson draws us into death's quiet room, not with trumpets, not with light, but with the dry, uncertain buzz of a fly. It is the 1860s. Dickinson is imagining the final moment. The room is hushed. The air is still like the stillness in the air, between the heaves of storm, that strange waiting silence before something arrives. The mourners have finished weeping. They've prepared for the moment, waiting for the king. Perhaps death, perhaps God. But what comes instead? Not a vision, not redemption. A fly with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me. The fly becomes the last thing the speaker sees. It interrupts the light, interposes itself between life and what might come after. And then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. No angelic chorus, no heavenly ascent, only blindness, only silence. Some hear Satan in the fly, some hear decay, some say it is the mundane asserting itself over the sublime. But perhaps Dickinson is asking something deeper. When we go, will it be profound or will it be ordinary? She leaves us not with certainty, but with wonder, with the buzzing in our ears, with the question hanging in the air. A bird came down the walk, and in that quiet opening, Emily Dickinson invites us to observe, to slow down, to see what often slips past unnoticed. It is the 1860s. A bird appears not in myth or metaphor, but right there on the garden path. He bites an angleworm, drinks a dewdrop, and hops sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. So precise, so gentle, his world rendered with the clarity of still water. We are watching silently. Then comes the offer, just a crumb, an attempt at connection, and yet it is too much. The bird takes flight. Then oars divide the ocean, two silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of noon, leap plashless as they swim. No sound, no resistance. Just motion like light through silk. In this moment, Dickinson does what few poets can. She captures the untouchable. She gives us nature not as symbol, but as presence. Fleeting, frightened, sublime. Emily Dickinson's poetic legacy rests on a collection of verses that continue to stir, startle, and illuminate. Though her poems were published posthumously and originally without titles, scholars and readers have come to refer to them by their iconic opening lines. Among the most haunting and celebrated is "Because I could not stop for death," where death appears not as a terror but as a quiet companion guiding the soul toward eternity. In "I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died," Dickinson captures the unsettling interruption of the ordinary at the very threshold of the afterlife. Her playful defiance shines in "I'm nobody. Who are you?" a brief but bold rejection of fame and public pretense. The paradox of triumph is explored in "Success is Counted Sweetest," reminding us that only those who fail can truly understand victory. Nature, in all its delicacy and mystery, breathes through poems like "A Bird Came Down, The Walk in Hope is the Thing with Feathers," the latter offering one of her most enduring metaphors for resilience. The internal landscape of anguish and perception takes shape in "I Felt a Funeral in My Brain," and after great pain, a formal feeling comes where psychological experience is rendered with eerie precision. Equally striking are poems like "My Life Had Stood," a loaded gun which confronts power, repression, and identity with explosive imagery, and there's a certain slant of light which uses winter light as a metaphor for emotional and spiritual affliction. Dickinson's romantic yearnings unfold in Wild Nights. Wild Nights. While "This Is My Letter to the World" reflects her awareness of poetic solitude and posthumous connection, whether evoking intoxication in "I taste a liquor never brewed," challenging reason in "Much madness is divinest sense," or painting movement with sound in "I like to see it lap the miles," Dickinson's work dances between the everyday and the eternal. Even the most ordinary encounters, like a snake in "A Narrow Fellow" in the grass or a locked heart in "The Soul," selects her own society, become windows into larger truths. Her short lyric "I Died for Beauty" but was scarce stages a conversation from beyond the grave, while "A Clock Stopped, Not the Mantles" transforms a household object into a symbol of mortality. These poems, each unique yet unmistakably Dickinson, form a tapestry of thought, emotion, and spiritual questioning that continues to echo across generations. Louisa May Alcott, born in the year 1832 and passing in 1888, carved a lasting place in American letters. Not through grand epics or sweeping romances, but through the quiet revolutions of domestic life. Raised amidst the high ideals and modest means of a transcendentalist household, Alcott was the daughter of Amos Bronson Alcott, a philosopher who dreamed more than he earned, and Abigail May Alcott, a pillar of strength and feminist resolve. Their home in Concord, Massachusetts, was no ordinary household. It was a meeting ground of minds like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller. Ideas floated through their parlor like candlelight, soft but illuminating. Yet, it was not lofty thoughts alone that shaped young Louisa. It was hunger, hard work, and hope. From teaching to seamstressing, from nursing wounded soldiers during the Civil War to scribbling stories in the quiet hours of night, Alcott wore many hats before donning the laurels of literary fame. Her hospital sketches, published in 1863, offered raw glimpses of war's human cost and introduced her voice to the reading public. But there was another side to Louisa, the daring pen of A. M. Barnard, under which she spun sensational tales of betrayal and passion, showcasing a creative duality that few suspected. Published across 2 volumes between the years 1868 and 1869, Little Women remains Louisa May Alcott's crown jewel story that stitched itself into the American imagination. Loosely inspired by her own family, it follows the March sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, through the quiet triumphs and tender trials of growing up in Concord, Massachusetts during the Civil War. At its heart beats Jo March, bold and bookish, a literary rebel with ink-stained fingers and dreams too big for parlors and petticoats. Jo was not merely a character, she was an echo of Louisa herself, a mirror held up to the girl who refused to be tamed by society's scripts. Through Jo, Alcott wrote a new kind of heroine, restless, passionate, and unafraid to want more. The novel's warm domestic world, rich with small lessons and deep love, offered something radical. A story where women's lives, in kitchens and attics, were worthy of literature. It reshaped the landscape of children's fiction, blending moral growth with emotional realism and sowing the seeds for generations of family stories to come. Its success brought sequels, Little Men in 1871 and Jo's Boys in 1886, each deepening the saga of education, resilience, and personal integrity. Yet Alcott's talents ran in more than one current. Beneath the surface of Little Women flowed darker, swifter waters visible in hospital sketches, drawn from her days as a Civil War nurse, and in the thrillers she penned under the pseudonym A.M. Barnard. By day, she offered moral tales to young readers. By night, she explored passion, ambition, and rebellion. This double authorship wasn't a contradiction. It was the full truth of a woman navigating a society that often asked her to choose. Alcott chose both. And in doing so, she became not only a founding mother of American children's literature, but a voice of feminist consciousness before the name was widely spoken. Through Jo's pen and her own, Louisa May Alcott carved space for generations of girls to imagine a life beyond the expected and to write it themselves. Mark Twain. Born Samuel Langhorne Clemens in the year 1835, remains one of the most unmistakable voices in American letters. With a pen dipped in wit, irreverence, and unflinching honesty, he became the nation's great mirror holder, the man who could laugh at the world even as he questioned its soul. He grew up along the Mississippi River, that mighty vein of American life, and worked as a steamboat pilot, a printer, a miner, a wanderer. Each role fed his storytelling, adding grit and river water wisdom to his tales. His first flash of fame came in 1865 with the celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. A tale so tall it felt rooted in truth. But Twain didn't stop at humor. He journeyed across oceans and continents, chronicling absurdities in The Innocents Abroad and Roughing It, mixing travel with satire, observation with exaggeration. Then came the novels that would define him forever, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer in 1876 and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in 1885. Huck's journey down the Mississippi wasn't just a boy's adventure. It was America's moral reckoning, told through the dialect of river folk, outcasts, and dreamers. Twain didn't polish the language, he let it breathe. He let it stammer, sing, and sting with truth. That choice alone made Huckleberry Finn not just a story, but a revolution. Twain wrote as Americans spoke, and in doing so, he honored every voice, flawed, funny, and fiercely real. Whether lampooning kings in A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court or dissecting racial hypocrisy in Pudd'nhead Wilson, Twain exposed the fault lines of his time with a grin that cut like a knife. Before Huck and Tom etched their place in American lore, Mark Twain carved his legacy with journeys, real ones, across oceans, deserts, and rivers. His travelogues were more than tales of distant lands. They were mirrors held up to both the world and America's wandering soul. The Innocents Abroad, published in 1869, began with a steamship voyage across Europe and into the Holy Land. But this was no sacred pilgrimage. Twain, ever the skeptic, mocked the blind awe of his fellow American tourist. He saw how guidebooks shaped their emotions, how reverence was often rehearsed, not felt. They even measured their tears by the paragraph, he seemed to say. His humor pierced the facade of cultural tourism, reminding readers that wonder, to be real, must be honest. Then came Roughing It in 1872, a tale of dust, gold, mirages, and mirth. Twain, now an eager Easterner heading west, finds absurdity in everything, from silver mines to Mormon sermons, desert mirages to frontier scams. The West was raw and restless, and Twain was its perfect observer, stumbling into its chaos with wide eyes and a wry smile. It is a coming-of-age memoir wrapped in a burlesque costume. Finally, in Life on the Mississippi, published in 1883, Twain returns not just to the river, but to himself. He recalls the rhythm of paddle wheels, the coded whistles of steamboats, the language of the current. It is part history, part memoir, and part elegy. The river he once knew has changed, tamed by commerce, stripped of its wild magic. The romance and the mystery of the Mississippi are gone now, he writes, and we feel that ache, too. Across these three journeys, Twain evolves. From satirical tourist to seasoned narrator of American contradiction, he crafts a non-fiction voice as rich as any novel. Equal parts laughter and lament, fact and fiction, boots and poetry, and in doing so, he helps America understand itself, not just where it's going, but who it becomes along the way. In later years, as losses mounted and his humor darkened, Twain never lost his edge. He once said, "The secret source of humor itself is not joy, but sorrow. There is no humor in heaven." And perhaps that's why he laughed so much, because he saw so much that hurt. He died in 1910, just as Halley's comet returned to the skies, exactly as he had predicted. And like the comet, Twain's brilliance flared brightly, fiercely, and left a trail we still follow. Published on the 9th of June, 1876, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer gave American literature one of its most enduring rebels. Not through grand revolutions, but with marbles, mischief, and a mischievous heart that beat along the muddy banks of the Mississippi. Set in the fictional town of St. Petersburg, a mirror of Twain's own boyhood home in Hannibal, Missouri, the novel invites us into a world where childhood feels eternal and summer days stretch long with possibility. Tom Sawyer, the orphan with a wild spirit and a restless soul, lives under the watchful eyes of Aunt Polly and the quiet rivalry of his half-brother Sid. But no fence can contain him. Remember the fence? That infamous white one? Tom, sentenced to paint it as punishment, spins the task into a masterclass of manipulation. He turns labor into envy, punishment into privilege. It's not just wit, it's a child's first taste of power. But Twain doesn't let us stay in mischief for long. The graveyard scene, shadowed by the brutal act of Injun Joe, shifts the story's tone. Suddenly, boyhood is no longer carefree. It's a witness to the world's darkness. And Tom, along with his loyal friend Huck, must carry that burden. What follows is not just treasure hunting or courtroom testimony, but the slow, stumbling path to moral awakening. Tom risks his own safety to do what is right, and in doing so, Twain elevates him from prankster to hero. He becomes a symbol not of perfection, but of growing courage, of choosing right over comfort. Though the book sold modestly at first, it would later become Twain's best-selling work in his own lifetime, and legend has it. It was among the very first novels ever typed on a typewriter, adding a stroke of invention to its legacy. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer remains more than a boy's story. It is a portrait of youth, of moral awakening, and of a nation trying to define its own conscience, one boyhood at a time. Published in the year 1885, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is not just a novel, it is America holding a mirror to itself, river-washed and unvarnished. Through the eyes of Huck, a boy born on the margins, we drift down the Mississippi, not just to escape, but to awaken. Huck's voice is raw, vernacular, unpolished. And yet, in that plain-spoken rhythm lies a truth deeper than any polished sermon. He runs from his drunk and violent father, but more than that, from a world that has forgotten how to be human. At his side is Jim, a man enslaved by law, but never by spirit. Together, they journey not only through river towns and backwoods trials, but through the moral wilderness of America itself. There are grifters, the Duke, and the King, spinning their corns in town squares. There are families feuding so long they've forgotten why. There are lies dressed as honor and laws blind to justice. Yet, floating on a raft in the quiet space between shores, Huck begins to see what the world refuses to admit, that Jim is not property, but a man. Twain's genius lies in the simplicity of Huck's dawning realization. When Huck says, "All right then, I'll go to hell," he chooses love over law, friendship over fear. It is the most sacred kind of rebellion. And with that, we come to the end of part 3 and also the final pages of chapter 2. But before we close the book, let's take a moment to look at what the UGC NET exam has drawn from this very section. One question asked about the sequel to Little Women, and the answer is Joe's Boys, a continuation of Louisa May Alcott's beloved tale. Another question quoted the following lines: "Success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend a nectar requires sorest need." It asked you to identify the poet, and yes, it was Emily Dickinson, the reclusive soul, who taught us how absence sharpens meaning. So that's all for now. Let's gently recap what we've explored in this rich, expansive chapter. We walked alongside Hawthorne's shadows, listened to Poe's whispering ravens, watched Stowe ignite abolitionist fires, and sailed the stormy seas with Melville. We stood beneath the open skies of transcendentalism, turned the pages of the Dial, and pondered with Emerson, Fuller, and Thoreau. We celebrated Whitman's free verse, listened to the still voice of Cullen Bryant, and followed Longfellow's lyrical journeys. We lingered in Dickinson's quiet room, shared the strength of Louisa May Alcott, and laughed and reflected with Mark Twain. All the PYQs for this chapter are linked in the description box. You can revisit them anytime to anchor what you've learned. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the heart of 19th century American literature. I'll see you in our next chapter, where the story of American letters continues.